Hello and welcome to the 11th video of this Excel course. I am Sumit Bansal and in this video we will learn about math formulas. Let's get started by learning about the int formula in Excel.
Int is a mathematical function and stands for integer. And as the name suggests, this gives us the integer part from a number. So let me show you how it works. I type int and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. You can see this takes one single argument, which is a number. And it will use that number to give you the integer part of that number. If you give a text in this argument, then it would return an error. So in this case, let me select A2. I close the bracket and I hit Control Enter. And this gives me 12 because 12 is the integer part and 2 is the decimal part. So what this is doing is this is truncating the decimal part and only gives you the integer section. Now let me show you what if the decimal part is different. In this case I had 12.2, here I have 12.9 and I hit Control Enter, but this still gives me 12. So this means that no matter what your decimal value is, it will get truncated and you would only get the integer part. The behavior changes a bit when you have a negative number. So if this is the number 12.2, let's see what happens. I type int and I select minus 12.2. You may expect this to return minus 12, but in this case this returns minus 30. And the reason is that this rounds away from 0. So if there is a negative number, it returns the integer part by rounding away from 0. In this case, when it rounds away from 0, it becomes 13. So whenever there is a negative number, then this formula would behave differently by rounding it off to an integer away from 0 and returning this value. If it is a positive number, then the decimal part gets truncated and only the integer part is returned. Mod is a mathematical function that returns the remainder when you divide one number by the other number. So let me show you how it works. I type mod and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. You can see this takes two arguments. First is the number that you are dividing and the second one is the divisor. And this function would return the remainder. If there is no remainder, it returns 0. So in this case, let me select the number as 10 and the divisor as 3. And I hit Control Enter, and this gives 1 because if you divide 10 by 3, then 1 is the remainder. Similarly, if I do it with the number as 3 and the divisor as 2, then this returns 1 again, because when you divide 3 by 2, 1 is the remainder. An important thing to note here is that the sign of the remainder would be the same as that of the divisor. So let me show you how it works. I type mod. The number in this case is minus 3 and the divisor is 2. Now when I hit Control Enter, this returns 1. You may think that this should return minus 1, but as a rule the sign of this value returned by mod function would always be the same as that of the divisor. I can show you some other examples of this. Equal to mod, I hit tab to autocomplete. The number is 3 and the divisor is minus 2. As a rule of thumb, the answer or the value returned by this function would have a negative sign because divisor is negative. I hit Control Enter and sure enough it is minus 1. And similarly, if you divide minus 3 by minus 2, again the sign should be negative because the sign of the divisor is negative. I hit Control Enter and this is minus 1. So this is how mod function works in Excel. Rand is a mathematical function and stands for random. This is used to generate a random number between 0 and 1. And this is also one of those functions that does not take any argument as input. So let me show you how rand function works. I type equal to and I type rand and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. You can see this does not take any argument, so you can simply close the parenthesis. And now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me a random number between 0 and 1. So I have applied this for one single cell, but I can use this for a lot of cells. So in this case, let me select all these 4 cells. When I select all these 4 cells, the first one is my active cell. As you can see, all these 3 are in dark gray shade. This one is in white shade. So now I type RAND and I hit tab and I close the parenthesis, and instead of enter, since I need to enter this formula in all these 4 cells, instead of enter I would hit control enter. So I hit control enter, and instantly all these 4 cells get filled by a random number between 0 and 1. One of the properties of this function is that when you are doing this to generate a random number between 0 to 1 for a lot of cells, these numbers would be distributed normally. So you can see you have 0.95, you have 0.51, you have 0.05, and you have 0.38. So you can see there is a whole lot of range that it has covered between 0 and 1. Now you have to be very cautious while using rand, because this is a volatile function. If you make any changes anywhere, or if you hit F9, so now if I hit F9, all these numbers would change. So I hit F9 and you can see all these numbers are changing. So whenever there is a calculation or any change in your worksheet, this function would recalculate itself, and hence that can make your workbook slow. So if you want to generate a set of numbers but you do not want them to keep on changing, you want them as static, it is a good practice to have this, copy this and paste this as value. If you want to do this only for one single cell, then you can just go into the edit mode, select this and press F9. This would generate one of the numbers and hit enter. So this gets converted from a formula to a static number. So this is how you can use rand function in Excel. Rand between is a mathematical function that can be used to generate a set of random numbers between two given numbers. So let me show you how this works. I type rand between, I hit tab to autocomplete the function. You can see this takes two arguments. First is the bottom number and the other one is the top number, and this would generate random number between these two numbers. So in this case I give the bottom number as 100, which is in A2, and the top number as 1000, which is in cell A3. Now when I hit control enter, this gives me 955, which is a number that is between these two numbers. A word of caution for rand between is that this is a volatile function. So if you have a worksheet where you have applied a lot of formulas, and whenever it recalculates or whenever you apply a new formula, this function would get recalculated and it would generate another random number. So if you have a huge worksheet with formulas, be cautious while you apply this. Let me show you how this works. If I press F9, you can see it generates another set of random number. So as I keep on pressing F9, these numbers keep on getting generated. If you only need random numbers but you do not want them to get recalculated again and again, it is a good practice to copy this and paste this as value. Let me show you what happens if I take some other examples. So in this case I had given cell references. I can also type these values manually. And when I do this and I hit control enter, again this generates a random number. Notice that when I hit control enter, even this gets recalculated, because as I mentioned, this is a volatile function that gets recalculated again and again. You can play with this function. It can generate numbers when you key in the top and bottom value. In this case I have the bottom value as 2 and top as 20, and I hit control enter, and this generates the number between these two numbers, and you can see the values above this also gets recalculated. You can also use rand between with negative numbers. So if I have the bottom value as -100 and I have the top value as 0, then this would generate a number between -100 and 0. So in this case this generates -33. Make sure that your bottom value is not higher than your top value. So in this case, if I change this and I give the bottom value as 100 and top value as 0, then this would give me an error, because this only can generate numbers when the bottom value is keyed in first and then the top value. So this is how rand between function works in Excel. This is a mathematical function that can be used to round off numbers, and you can specify the number of decimal places till which you want to round it off. So let me show you how this works. I type round, and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. You can see this takes two arguments. First is the number that you want to round off, and the other one is the number of digits or the number of decimal points till which you want to round it off. So let me take an example of the number 500.51, and I want to round it off till one decimal place. So now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 500.5 as it has rounded it off to the first decimal place. Let me show you another example. I type round, I hit tab to autocomplete the function. I take the number as 500.55 and I say round it off to one decimal place. Now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 500.6 because this number is greater than 5, and when a number is greater than 5 it is rounded it off to the next higher number. So in this case 0.55 becomes 0.6. You can also round it off to 0 decimal place numbers, which means that you would not get any decimals, and based on your decimal value this would change the first digit. So in this case, since this is 0.55, this would become 501. Had this been 0.45, then this would have become 500 only, because the decimal number is not greater than 0.5. If it is greater than or equal to 0.5, it becomes 1. You can also use round function to round off these numbers with a decimal place of -1. This means that, let me show you how it works. This means that this is decimal place 1, this is decimal place 2, but if you type -1, it goes back to the non-decimal part of the number and it says this is decimal place -1, this is decimal place -2. So now when you say round it off to decimal place -1, based on the decimal value, it would give you the number. In this case, let me hit Control Enter, and this gives you 500. The reason being that this number 0.55 is not greater than 5. Had this been greater than 5, it would have returned 510. Let me show you. If I type 505.55 and I hit Control Enter, this gives me 510 because this is rounding it off to the -1 decimal place, which is the 10th position. So this is 0th position, 10th position, 100th position. I can use this same logic to round it off to -3 decimal positions. I type 500.55, and when I give -3.55 comma -3, then it means that it will go to the -3rd position. So this is -1, -2, -3, and using this number it would round it off. So when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 1000 because this number is greater than 500. If you go to the -3rd position, which is 5, this entire value is greater than 5 and it returns it returns 1000. Had this been 400, so 400.55, this would return 0. So this is how a round function works in Excel. This is a mathematical function that can be used to add values. Let me show you how this works. I type sum in Excel, I hit tab to autocomplete, and you can see this is one of those functions that can take a series of arguments. So it says number 1, number 2, and so on, which means that you can give it a set of numbers and you can continue to give it numbers and it will add it. So in this case I have numbers in A2 to A4. So what I can do, I can either select individually A2, A3, A4 and then hit Control Enter. This gives me 60, which is the sum of these numbers. Or instead of doing this, I can simply go and select this entire range, and it says A2 to A4 and it counts all these values within this. And now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me the sum of all these 3 numbers. As I mentioned, you need not always give it a range or always separate these numbers by comma. You can choose to have the first 2 as a range and the third one as an individual cell reference. This is useful when you have non-contiguous cell ranges. So if I have 2 numbers here and the third number is here, then I would have to select this here and I would press Control and select the third one. So it works the same, or you can hit comma and select the cell reference manually. Now I hit Control Enter and this gives me 60 again, which is the same as this above result. A very interesting thing to note about sum function is that if I type an argument in double quotes, this means that this number is in double quotes, indicating this is text, and I type something manually, a number manually, which is 10, I also give it a cell reference A2, and I also use the argument true. Sum function can still process all these different arguments. So when I hit Control Enter, it gives me 31. The first thing it did was to convert this text into a number. Excel identified that this is a number because sum function can only take a number, so it automatically converts this into a number. The other one is already a number. A2 again is a number, and Excel converts trues to 1 and false to 0. So in this case, this true is counted as 1, and hence it adds all these numbers, 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 1, and it gives 31. So this is how sum function works in Excel. This is a mathematical formula that lets you add numbers when a certain criteria is met. So let me show you how SUMIF function works in Excel. I type SUMIF and I hit tab. You can see it takes 3 arguments. The first one is the range, the second is the criteria, and third is the sum range. The first range is actually criteria range, where your criteria resides. Second argument is the criteria, based on which it would check in criteria range, and when this criteria is met, it would add the corresponding number from the sum range. A few things to note about this here is that SUMIF function would ignore any text or blank cells if there are in the sum range, and if your criteria range and sum range length are different, then it would take criteria range. So in example, I take criteria range as these 3 and sum range as these 4, then Excel would only consider these 3 rows and not the 4th one. Now let me show you how this works. In case of criteria range, I select B2 to B5. B2 to B5 here, these numbers. And in criteria, I need values that are greater than 200. Now whenever you use a mathematical operator in SUMIF criteria, then it should always be in double quotes. So in this case, since this is greater than 200, I type greater than 200 within double quotes. Let me remove this. Yeah, in double quotes. And now when I close this, you can see I have not given it the third criteria, which is sum range. In case I do not give sum range, then it would consider that the criteria range and sum range are the same. In this case, you can see my criteria is that this should be greater than 200, so this is my criteria range, and I also need to sum these values only, so I need not give a separate sum range. It would not hurt if you select a sum range separately, but that is just redundant. Now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 1100 because there are 2 numbers that are greater than 200 here, which is 700 and 400. So this gives me the sum of these 2 numbers. Now let me show you another example where I would use all the 3 arguments. So I type SUMIF, I hit tab to autocomplete the function. In range, criteria range, I select these 4 cells, A2 to A5, and I say that my criteria is Tom. So whenever you find this criteria is met, whenever in these cells you find Tom, then you go and you add the corresponding value from the sum range, and this is my sum range. So what it does is it'll check, since my criteria is Tom, this meets the criteria, so it takes 100, and this does not meet, this meets the criteria, it takes 700, and this adds these 2 numbers, 100 and 700. So if I hit Control Enter, this gives me 800. Now you can also use wildcard characters in your criteria. So let me show you how this works. In range, I again select these cells, A2 to A5, and in criteria, I say that it should be any text that contains the alphabet A in it should match the criteria. So to do that, I say in double quotes, I say star. Star means any number of characters, A star. This means that the criteria should have A, it could have any number of characters before A, and it could have any number of characters after A. So this is my criteria, and the sum range is this. So now Excel goes up here and it checks for Tom. Tom does not have A, so this this does not meet the criteria. It goes to Jane. Jane has A here after J, so it adds 200 to its list. Then it goes and checks for Arjun. Arjun does have A. It has A as the starting alphabet of the name, so it goes and checks 400 and it adds these two numbers since Tom again does not have A. So now when I hit Control Enter, it gives me 600 because these two characters have A in it. You can use different wildcard characters. The other wildcard character is question mark, which says that if I use question mark here, then it says that there should only be one character or one alphabet before A, and there could be any number of characters after A. So now if I use this condition and I hit Control Enter, this gives me 200 because there is only one name which has only one character before the alphabet A, that is Jane. So this is how you can create a criteria in SUMIF function, and this is how SUMIF function works in Excel. This is a mathematical function that can be used to add values when you have one or more than one criteria, and when those criteria are met, then their corresponding values are added. Let me show you how this works. So I go to this cell and I type SUMIFs. You can see there are two formulas, SUMIF and SUMIFs. SUMIF is used when there is only one single criteria, but for multiple criteria we use SUMIFs. You can see it takes a number of arguments. The first one is the sum range, the values that you want to add. The second one is the criteria range 1, which is a range which has all the criteria. And the third one is the criteria 1. This is where you specify your required criteria. And if you have more than one criteria, then you can go on and it would introduce more arguments, which would be criteria range 2, criteria 2, criteria range 3, criteria 3, and so on and so forth. Now let me show you an example by selecting B2 to B5 as the sum range. So these are the values that would be added. For criteria, I could have either the same range or I could have some other range, and I would make my criteria based on the selected criteria range. So in this case, let me select the same range, for which is the sum range. My criteria range is also the same. Now as third argument, I would have to specify a criteria, and in this case it is greater than 100. So I'm saying that in your criteria range you look for numbers that are greater than 100. Remember, whenever you're using an operator, a mathematical operator such as greater than, less than, equal to, not equal to, you should always use them within double quotes. If you do not use them within double quotes, the formula would not give you the right answer. So this is my first criteria, and I'll show you if I have another criteria how to use it. So I again select the same range as criteria range 2, and this time my criteria is less than 500. I close the parenthesis and I hit Control Enter, and this gives me 600. Note that this formula would add those values that meets all the given criteria. So in this case I have two criteria. Only and only when both these criteria are met, it adds those values. So what happens is it goes to this range, it checks at 100. This is not greater than 100. This is equal to 100, but it's not greater than 100. So that criteria is not met. This is left out. It checks for 200. This meets the criteria. Greater than 100, less than 500. 400 meets the criteria, but 700 does not, because 700 is greater than 500. So these two values are added. Now this was an example where I used numeric values as criteria. You can also use text values as criteria, and here I would also show you a very smart use of wildcard characters. So again, the sum range is B2 to B5, and criteria range is A2 to A5, which has these names. Now in criteria I would use wildcard character. There are two prominent wildcard characters, which is asterisk and question mark, and asterisk is to specify any number of characters, and question mark represents one character. So in this case, let me use asterisk, and I type A and asterisk again. So this is my criteria. What this specifies is that any word which has alphabet A in it would satisfy this criteria, because it says that there should be alphabet A and there could be any number of characters before A, which is denoted by this asterisk, and there could be any number of characters after A, which is denoted by the second asterisk. So now my first criteria is built. For second criteria, again select this range, and my second criteria is J asterisk. What this means is that any word that starts with J would meet this criteria, and it could have any number of characters after J because I've given a asterisk here. So now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 200. Now let's see how it worked. This is my sum range and this is the criteria range. Within criteria range, it checked for the first condition, which is that the word should contain A, because there is asterisk A asterisk. Tom does not have A in it, Jane has an A in it, Arjun has an A in it, and Tom has no A in it. So these two meet my first criteria. Let's check for the second criteria, which says that the word should start with J. Arjun does not start with J. Only Jane is the word that meets both the criteria. So the formula goes to its sum range and fetches that corresponding value, which is 200. If I change this to Jane as well, then you can see this changes to 600, because these two meet the criteria and hence its corresponding value in sum range are added. Let me press Ctrl Z to go back to the original thing. Alright, now let me show you another example of sum ifs. In sum range, I again choose these values, and in criteria range I choose these names, and my criteria is it should not be equal to Tom. These two operators, when used in such a manner, indicates not equal to, and I would use another numeric criteria with it. So my criteria range 2 is this range, which is B2 to B5, and my numeric criteria is greater than 200. So you can see it is not necessary that you have the same range in all the criterias. You can have different ranges and build different criterias. Now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 400. Let's see why it gives me 400. It goes back here and first checks for the first condition, which is not equal to Tom. A2 does not meet the criteria, A3, A4 meet the criteria, and A5 does not meet the criteria. So these two meet the criteria. The second condition is it should be greater than 200, and the sum range is this. The first value does not meet the criteria, second does not meet it because it is equal to 200, not greater than. Third meets the criteria and fourth does not. So in this case these two meet the criteria, and in this case this meets the criteria. But for sum ifs to work, all the conditions should be met. So only 400 is returned, because this is the only number which meets, this is the only number in sum range that meets all the criteria. So this is how sum ifs function works in Excel. This is a mathematical function that can be used to add the product of two or more than two arrays. Let me show you how it works. So here I type sum product, I hit tab to autocomplete the function, and you can see it takes a number of arguments. These are arrays which this formula would first multiply and then add. It can take a number of arguments. So when you see dot 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 at the end of these arguments, it means that the number of arguments are not fixed, and you can enter array 1, array 2, array 3, and then you can continue to enter these arrays. In this case, let me select A2 to A5 as array 1 and B2 to B5 as array 2. That's it. I would close the bracket, and when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 70. Now the way this works is that the first element of first array is multiplied by the first element of second array, and the second element of first array is multiplied by the second element of second array, third by third, fourth by fourth, and then all the values after multiplication are added. So this formula, it multiplies 1 with 5, 2 with 6, 3 with 7, 4 with 8, and then add all these values, which gives us 70. Now let me show you what happens if the array has more number of columns. So in this case, let me select A2 to B5 as array 1. This has 4 rows and 2 columns, and B2 to C5 as array 2. This again has 4 rows and 2 columns. Now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 374. And the logic is the same. The first element of first array, which is 1, is multiplied with the first element of second array, which is 5. The second element of the first array, which is 2, is multiplied by the second element of the second array, which is 6, and so on and so forth. When all these multiplications are done, all these values are added. It is very important to note that the dimensions of these arrays should be same. In this case, I had 4 rows and 2 columns, and the second array was again 4 rows and 2 columns. If I give the dimensions as different, this would return an error. Let me show it. I type sum product and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. I select A2 to A4 as array 1 and B2 to B5 as array 2. Note that the dimensions are different. Here there are 3 rows and here there are 4 rows. Now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me a value error because the size of these arrays is not same. Sum product is a very good function to use if you have to evaluate conditions. So let me show you an example. I type sum product, I hit tab to autocomplete, and in array 1 I say A2 to A5 is greater than 2. So what I've essentially done is I would put this in bracket. So here what I've essentially done is I have given a condition that this array is greater than 2. And what would this return? If I hit F9, this would return a series of trues and falses based on when the condition is true or false. The first 2 are false because these are not greater than 2, but 3 and 4 are true because these are greater than 2. Now this is my array, and my second array is B2 to B5, and I close this. Now let me show you what happens if I hit Control Enter. As of now, when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 0. The reason being that these are not numbers. These are trues and false, but these are not numbers. So to convert them to numbers, I introduce double negative here. Double negative does nothing, but it only converts trues and false to zeros and ones. So a true would be converted to 1 and false to 0. Now when I hit Control Enter, this gives me 15. Why? Because it goes here and checks this is less than, this is not greater than 2, this is not greater than 2, this is greater than 2. So it takes, it multiplies 1 with 7, and this is greater than 2, so it multiplies 1 with 8, and it sums up these two values. So this is a helpful function if you have to evaluate a set of conditions and then get the sum of those corresponding arrays. So in this case you can see I had A2 to A5 greater than 2. It checks in this array and returns the sum of these two values. Be cautious when you use sum product. A lot of people have reported that their worksheets are slow when they use sum products with complicated arrays. So be a little bit cautious, but this is again a very good function if you have multiple conditions to evaluate. So that's it in this video. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and have a nice day.